She sat barefoot on the sidewalk, holding a drawing, not a sign. No words, no cries, just hope. Every person walked past her like she didn't exist, until one man stopped. And what he saw in that drawing made him whisper, "Call for help. Now." What was in that picture? And who was this little girl, alone in a world that had forgotten her? Stay with us as we uncover a story of loss, love, and a little artist who changed one man's life forever. The city pulsed with life. Honking cars, rushing footsteps, and distant chatter echoed down the sidewalks. Businessmen hurried with coffee in hand. Women talked into their phones. Children laughed on their way from school. But in the middle of it all, almost invisible against the gray concrete, sat a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 5 or 6. Her skin was a warm, rich brown. Her hair twisted into small braids that had clearly once been neat. Now they hung loose, slightly matted from days without care. She wore a faded blue jumper that had long since lost its color, and no shoes. Her feet were dirty, scraped, and curled beneath her as she sat cross-legged on a flattened cardboard box near the alley's entrance. What made her stand out, if anyone bothered to notice, was the picture she held. A small wooden photo frame clutched tightly in her fragile hands. Inside it, a crayon drawing, 4 stick figures holding hands beneath a large yellow sun. A tall man, a woman in a dress, a girl with braids, and a tiny one in pink. People passed. By some looked, most didn't. She whispered every few minutes, voice so faint it was nearly swallowed by the street noise. "Sir, will you buy my drawing?" No one stopped. Some smiled politely and kept walking. A few turned their heads and walked faster, assuming she was another case of the system failing someone. A woman clutched her handbag a little tighter. A man in a blazer gave her a scowl and muttered something about begging kids before crossing the street. Still, she didn't move. Even when the wind picked up and tugged at her thin sleeves, even when her stomach let out a low, pained growl, she just sat, waiting, clutching that frame like it was life itself. At the end of the block, an older man stepped out of a cab. He wore a beige overcoat and polished leather shoes. His hair, thick and silver, was combed neatly to the side, and he carried a brown briefcase that had clearly seen many boardrooms. His name was Harold Kent, a retired architect who once helped design the very buildings lining the street. He had just left his lawyer's office. Another boring afternoon finalizing estate paperwork, preparing documents he never thought he'd have to care about. Especially after his wife passed last winter. Life had been quiet lately. Too quiet. As Harold walked, something made him pause. A flicker of movement from the side, perhaps. Or maybe it was a sound. Not a cry, not a plea, but a whisper. He turned, gaze falling on the little girl. "Sir, will you buy my drawing?" Harold stood there, frozen. The sight hit him, like a punch to the chest. Not because she begged or cried or made a scene. She didn't. She just looked up at him with eyes too big for her face, wide, brown, and filled with something far heavier than sadness. It was silence, the kind of silence people carry when they've been forgotten. He stepped closer. "Did you draw that?" he asked softly, crouching beside her. She nodded. "May I see it?" She held it out carefully like she was passing along a sacred artifact. Harold studied it. 4 stick figures holding hands, each labeled with wobbly letters. Mommy, Daddy, me, Lila. He noticed something else. The bottom corner of the paper was slightly burned. "Is this your family?" he asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "They're gone." His breath caught. "How long have you been here, sweetheart?" She shrugged slightly. "Since the fire." "What fire?" Her voice cracked a little. "Our car. It turned over. Mommy screamed. I woke up outside. Then people came, but they didn't see me." Her tiny fingers clutched the drawing tighter. "I waited where Mommy said, but no one came." Harold's heart dropped. "Do you know your name?" She paused again. "I think it's Ellie." Tears welled in Harold's eyes. How could such a small child carry such an enormous burden? alone, hungry, barefoot, and still not asking for money, just hoping someone would buy her drawing because her mom told her to draw if she ever got lost. That part broke him. He knelt on the cold ground beside her, not caring who stared. Slowly, he slipped off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Her frame was so small beneath the fabric he could barely see her hands. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she looked up at him and asked in the softest voice, "Do you think Mommy will be proud of me?" Harold blinked hard, trying to keep it together. "Yes," he whispered. "So proud." He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen. Who would he even call? The police? They might just place her in the foster system and forget her all over, again. He didn't want that. Not for this child who had already been through too much. Instead, he tapped on a different contact. Margaret Ellis, an old friend who ran a small private care program for abandoned children. They had worked together on community shelters years ago. She picked up after 2 rings. "Harold? Is everything okay?" "I found a little girl," he said. His voice cracked. "She's alone. She says her family died in a fire. She's been on the street selling a drawing." "Margaret, she's just a baby." There was a long pause. "Where are you?" "Corner of East Monroe and 17th. I'm on my way." As Harold waited, he sat beside Ellie on the ground, shielding her from the wind with his body. She leaned, against him, still clutching the frame. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, she looked less afraid. And Harold knew, right then, that this wasn't just a chance encounter. This was something more. A moment that would change both of their lives, and maybe, just maybe, become the beginning of a new kind of family. The sirens of the city still howled somewhere in the distance, but the world around Harold and Ellie had slowed into a bubble of silence. He held his phone in one hand, his free arm shielding the little girl who leaned into him without saying a word. Her head rested on his shoulder, light as paper, yet heavy with things no child should have to carry. 10 minutes passed before Harold saw the familiar gray Prius turning the corner. It rolled to a gentle stop. Out stepped Margaret Ellis, a woman in her mid-50s with red glasses, wiry brown hair tucked into a bun, and the kind of warmth in her eyes that made children instinctively trust her. She wore a long sweater over jeans, and her hands moved with calm precision as she approached. She didn't shout. She didn't crouch down and flood Ellie with questions. She simply removed her scarf and knelt beside them. Quietly, gently, she wrapped it around Ellie's bare feet. That one act, that one moment of dignity, shattered something inside the little girl. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't sob. She didn't scream. She just leaned forward, pressed her face into Harold's chest and whispered, "I tried to wait. I waited where Mommy told me." Margaret laid a hand on Ellie's back and said softly, "And you did so well. You were so brave." Ellie didn't flinch or move away. She let herself feel something she hadn't in days, comfort. Harold felt the tension in his chest loosen just slightly. But inside he was already thinking 100 steps ahead. Where would she sleep tonight? Who would file the report? Could she be lost in the system? Again? Margaret looked up at him. "There's a care center, not the state-run ones. This is ours. Small, quiet, with real counselors. We don't warehouse kids. We help them." Harold nodded. "I'll follow in my car." But before he stood, Ellie gripped his hand. "Are you coming too?" she asked. Her eyes trembled as she spoke. Harold felt a lump in his throat. "Yes, I promise." The care center was nestled on a quiet side street, behind tall iron gates and a weeping willow tree. The sign simply read, "The Haven." It didn't look like an institution, more like an old bed and breakfast turned sanctuary. Inside, Ellie was wrapped in soft blankets and given a warm bowl of soup. A nurse gently cleaned her scraped knees while another carefully brushed her hair with slow, patient strokes. She didn't say much, but she didn't resist. Harold sat just outside the room, watching through the glass. His heart ached every time she looked up, hoping to find a familiar face and realizing there were none. Margaret sat beside him with a clipboard. "We'll run her prints, maybe check hospital records or school admissions. But Harold," she looked at him. "Sometimes kids like this, they fall through the cracks. Burn injuries, chaotic scenes, no ID, no next of kin. Sometimes they're left unclaimed not out of cruelty, but because the system never saw them in the first place. But," she said her family died in a fire. Margaret nodded. "It could take days to trace that." Just then, one of the staff called them over. "You'll want to see this," she said. She held up the framed drawing Ellie had clung to. Gently, she removed the paper and turned it over. Written faintly in pencil on the back was a smudged but readable line: Ellie J. 403 Wilden Drive. Harold blinked. "That's not far. That neighborhood had that car crash weeks ago." Margaret's eyes widened. "The one where they said the whole family died." They both stood in silence. She was the survivor. 2 days later, a social worker confirmed. Ow. A tragic accident had taken the lives of Jasmine and Daniel Johnson, along with their youngest daughter, Lila. Ellie had been thrown from the back seat before the fire engulfed the vehicle. Paramedics had assumed she died later at the hospital. But somewhere between transport, trauma, and the chaos of the emergency room, she had wandered off. A child in shock, no memory, no shoes, no file with her name on it. She had walked out, and no one noticed. Harold couldn't sleep that night. He paced his apartment, staring at the framed copy of Ellie's drawing he had asked to keep. Something about her stuck with him, the quiet strength, the stubborn hope. The way she still believed her mother's words, that someone might find her if she just held on to the picture. By morning, he had made a decision. That afternoon, he returned to the Haven with bags in hand. Inside were new sketchbooks, crayons, snacks, and a small pink backpack. When Ellie saw him, she didn't speak. She just ran to him and held his leg, burying her face again. "I brought you some paper," he said, crouching. She nodded. "To draw my family? Or whatever you like," Harold said gently. Over the next week, Harold visited every day. He brought storybooks, told her about buildings he used to design, and showed her how to draw trees with depth and shadow. Ellie, in turn, drew more. Always the same family: Mom, Dad, Lila, and her. But one day, something changed. Harold walked in and found her coloring a new figure, taller, wearing glasses, with white hair. "Who's that?" he asked. She paused, then looked up. "You." Harold's throat tightened. "Me?" Ellie nodded. "You stayed." One afternoon, Margaret pulled Harold aside. "There's more," she said. "We've been contacting distant relatives. No one's stepping forward. But Ellie keeps asking for you." He stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means," Margaret said slowly, "she trusts you. It's rare, Harold. I've worked with kids for 25 years. When they choose someone, it's sacred. But I never planned for this." Margaret smiled. Neither did she. A week later, Harold sat in a quiet meeting with a judge, 2 counselors, and a child advocate. His hand trembled as he signed a temporary guardianship form. He walked out of the office and found Ellie sitting on a bench outside with her crayons. She looked up at him. "Can we go now?" "Go?" he asked, kneeling. "Go home," she whispered. He blinked, then smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, let's go home." The air in Harold's apartment had never felt warmer. It wasn't because of the central heating or the sun streaming through the windows. It was because of the small girl curled up on his living room couch with a purple crayon in one hand and a half-eaten banana in the other, Ellie. It had been 3 weeks since Harold signed the temporary guardianship papers. Weeks filled with unfamiliar routines, tiny shoes scattered near the door, bedtime stories whispered under a handmade blanket, soft music playing during breakfast. His once silent home now echoed with laughter, drawings, and the occasional humming of lullabies Ellie claimed her mom used to sing. He never thought he'd be here, a retired architect, a bachelor most of his life, suddenly learning how to braid tiny curls and cut sandwiches into heart shapes. But Ellie didn't come with a manual. She came with stories and colors. Every day she drew, not just the past, but now the present. And Harold began to notice something new in her sketches. The stick figures were changing. Where once there had been 4, her original family, there were now 5. Sometimes the 5th person was holding her hand. Sometimes she drew them with a white beard or comically large glasses. Once she labeled them me, Mommy, Daddy, Lila, Mr. Harold. It was the first time she'd called him by name. He kept that one taped to the fridge. But the nights were harder. She still cried sometimes. Not loudly, but in the quiet way children do when they don't want to wake anyone. A muffled sniffle, a sudden gasp, a whispered "Mommy" into the dark. Harold would hear her and sit beside her bed. "I'm here," he'd whisper. "You're safe." And she'd reach out blindly for his hand, like she was trying to hold onto something real. One night she asked, "If I forget her voice, does that mean I wasn't good enough?" Harold's heart shattered. He wrapped her in a blanket and said gently, "Forgetting someone's voice doesn't mean they're gone. It just means your heart is making space for more love. And you, Ellie, you were more than good enough. You were everything." That night, she didn't cry again. One crisp morning, Margaret came to visit. She brought a small envelope marked with official stamps. Inside was the final court decision. She sat Harold down and said simply, "They approved permanent guardianship." He stared at the paper. The words blurred, not because he didn't understand them, but because of the overwhelming wave that washed over him. He wasn't just a caretaker anymore. He was her family. Margaret smiled. "You know, when I first called you that day, I didn't think you'd stay this involved." Harold chuckled. "Neither did I." Ellie peeked from behind the doorframe, her face painted with chocolate from a cookie. "Is she staying?" she asked. Harold looked at her, then at the papers and smiled. "She's home." That weekend, Harold took Ellie to the art store. Her eyes lit up as she walked through rows of watercolor sets, sketch pads, glitter pens, and pastel chalks. It was like stepping into her dreams. He let her pick anything she wanted. When they got home, she rushed to the table, spread everything out, and began drawing with focus and excitement. But this time, she wasn't drawing people. She was drawing houses, streets, parks, shops, places with names like Safe Bakery and Hug House. Each building had hearts instead of windows, and the trees had swings made of stars. Harold watched, stunned. "You're building a town," he said. She nodded. "A town for kids like me." The next day, Harold took Ellie to a small community fair where children could showcase their artwork. He didn't expect much, maybe a few smiles, a few kind remarks. But Ellie's drawings stopped people in their tracks. One woman gasped. "Who made these?" Harold pointed to the girl in the yellow overalls holding a juice box. She did. The woman knelt. "Sweetheart, you made me feel like I could live in your world." Ellie smiled shyly. By the end of the event, Ellie had been invited to join a local youth art program. Her work would be featured in a children's therapy center, a place where kids who'd gone through trauma could sit, draw, and feel safe. Harold watched her as she ran between easels, her curls bouncing, her face glowing with purpose. He realized something then. Ellie wasn't just healing. She was helping others heal too. A few days later, a knock came at the door. It was a man in his mid-30s, holding a camera and a notebook. "I'm from the New Horizons Journal," he said. "We heard about a little girl whose art inspired a new community project." Harold hesitated. "We want to tell her story, not for sympathy, but for hope." He looked at Ellie, who was sitting on the porch steps, humming as she colored in a new house labeled Dream Room. Harold knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, someone wants to share your drawings with the world. Is that okay?" She looked up, unsure. "Will Mommy see it in heaven?" Harold's voice caught. "Yes," he said. I think she already sees everything. You do. Ellie thought for a moment, then handed the man a drawing, the same one she had first tried to sell on the street. The one with 4 stick figures and a sun, but this time there was a 5th figure, and a small heart above the entire family. You can show this one, she said softly. It's the first one I drew, and now it's complete. The article came out a week later. Crayon Town: How one child's drawings sparked a movement of healing. It went viral. Artists donated supplies to shelters. Therapists used her drawings in group sessions. Schools invited Harold and Ellie to speak about kindness and paying attention to those society ignores. But none of that mattered to Ellie as much as the moment she saw her drawing printed in full color, framed on a wall at a local gallery. Harold took a photo of her standing beside it. She looked at the camera and whispered, "Now Mommy can see what I became." The sky was silver with rain clouds the morning the letter came. Harold had just finished making Ellie's favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with toast shaped like stars, when he heard the knock at the door. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't loud, but something about it felt different. He opened it to find a tall woman in a navy coat holding a leather briefcase. Her eyes were tired but kind. "Mr. Harold Whitaker?" she asked gently. "Yes?" "I'm with the State Family Liaison office. May I come in?" His heart dropped. Ellie, seated at the kitchen table with purple crayons in her hand, looked up curiously. Harold nodded slowly and let the woman in. They sat at the dining table while Ellie quietly moved to the couch, still drawing but listening. "I want you to know," the woman began, "this isn't bad news. It's complicated news." She placed a sealed folder in front of Harold. "Her name is Diana Clay. She's Ellie's biological aunt. She's been searching for her since the accident." Harold went silent. "She lived overseas for the past year," the woman continued. "Didn't even know about the crash until 3 weeks ago when she returned. She filed a petition for legal custody. But when she read what you did, she said she didn't want to uproot Ellie if it would hurt her." Harold's fingers gripped the folder tightly. "She's in town," the woman added quietly. "She'd like to meet you. And Ellie. But only if Ellie wants to." He looked at the small girl curled up on the couch, her crayon still moving in smooth little swirls. He couldn't speak. The woman stood. "I'll leave you with this. Take your time. We'll respect whatever decision you both make." Then she was gone. That night, Harold didn't sleep. He sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what it meant to be a father. Not just legally, not just by duty, but in the deep, sacred way that meant someone trusted you with their life, their fears, their heart. He thought of Ellie's little hand in his, her drawings, her first laugh in his home, her whispered questions. In the dark, could love alone make you a parent? He looked at the envelope on his nightstand. Then he looked at Ellie, sleeping peacefully in the next room, her arms wrapped around the drawing she never let go of. The next morning, Harold sat, her down on the couch. Her cereal bowl rested on her lap, forgotten. "Sweetheart," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something." Her eyes met his, wide and cautious. "You have an aunt. Her name's Diana. She's your mommy's sister." Ellie's eyes blinked, slowly taking it in. She didn't know about what happened until recently. "She's been looking for you, and she wants to meet you." Ellie stayed quiet for a long time. Then she asked the one thing Harold had been dreading. "Does that mean I have to leave?" He reached for her hand. "No, you don't have to do anything. Only if you want to." Ellie looked down, her fingers running over the edge of her drawing. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just nodded once and whispered, "I want to see her. But I want you there too." They met in the botanical garden on a soft Sunday afternoon. The air smelled of lilacs and soil. Birds chirped from distant trees as children laughed in the nearby fountain. Diana stood by a bench nervously twisting a silver ring on her finger. She was in her late 30s, tall, with the same curls Ellie had, only longer and streaked with dark auburn. When Ellie approached, clutching Harold's hand, Diana's eyes filled with tears instantly. "Ellie," she breathed, her voice cracking. "You look just like your mom." Ellie didn't answer. She only stared. Harold crouched beside her and whispered, "It's okay, just listen." Diana knelt too. "I wasn't there," she said. "I should have been. I didn't know. But I've missed you every day since I found out." Ellie looked down at the drawing she brought, the original one now slightly torn but still sacred. "Did you know Mommy liked pink lemonade?" she asked suddenly. Diana smiled sadly. "She used to steal it from the fridge and blame me." Ellie's lips twitched. A half smile. "Did you know my sister sang when she cooked?" "Yes," Diana whispered. "She was always out of tune, but it made everything taste better." A tear rolled down Ellie's cheek. Then she walked forward and hugged Diana. They didn't talk about custody that day. They just sat, Harold, Ellie, and Diana, on the bench as Ellie showed her aunt her latest drawings. She spoke more than Harold had ever seen. Her voice was light, open, healing. As the sun began to set, Diana stood and looked at Harold. "She doesn't just need blood," she said. "She needs what you've given her." Harold looked at her surprised. "I'm not here to take her from you. I want to be in her life. I want to be her aunt, but you're her home now." He nodded, trying not to cry. "I'd be honored to share her," Diana added gently. Harold offered a hand. Diana took it. Weeks passed, then months. Diana became part of their lives. She picked Ellie up from art class on weekends. They baked cookies together and visited Ellie's family's grave, where Ellie left a copy of her most recent drawing. A full family, 5 people, 1 heart. Ellie had even added the gravestones in the background. Not sad, just present. She was learning to carry love and loss together. One evening, she climbed into Harold's lap and handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it slowly. It was a drawing of a big house, wide, warm, with windows shaped like stars. In front of it stood 6 people, Mommy, Daddy, Lila, Diana, Ellie, and him. And on the roof, written in bold purple crayon, were the words, "Home is who stays." Harold couldn't speak. He just held her. In the silence, Ellie whispered, "You didn't have to stay, but you did. That's what makes you mine." And so, the girl who once sat invisible on a cold sidewalk, holding a drawing like a prayer, now ran through a backyard full of sunlight and safety. Her drawings no longer cries for help, but celebrations of a life rebuilt. Not perfect, not easy, but full of hope, color, and love. The end.